So welcome back to Oppenham's podcast, Heads and Tails. I am very privileged today to be speaking to Anthony from Stowe. Anthony's an educational titan, I think it's fair to say. From early interests in history and journalism, I believe, he found his way through teaching at Sherborne, St Paul's and Tunbridge to Stowe in 2003, and he's been headmaster there since. The school has undoubtedly resurfaced as a complete powerhouse in that time since Anthony got involved, and he's a well-known figure, both spoken and written, in the education world, alongside important roles supporting organisations like the Tate in St Ives and Street Child. He continues to lead the Stowe Group today, which includes a couple of prep schools as well as the main secondary school, and I'm very grateful to him for being with me today. So Anthony, thank you for joining. I'd love to start on a bit of your background. I suppose, how did your experiences of childhood and the mentorship you received growing up lead you to what you're doing today?
Yeah, first of all, Henry, thank you so much for inviting me onto this podcast, and really good to connect back with you. As you know, I've had a relationship with your father as a governor of Summerfields, and I've got to declare an interest. You are employing my niece. So anyway, conflicts of interest aside, mentorship, really interesting. I was an appallingly bad pupil. A lot of my early reports were just hopeless, and it really wasn't until I got into the sixth form that I began to find my way, and just some very good teaching. One of my best teachers was someone called Peter Pilkington, who was the headmaster of King's Canterbury. Always good for heads to teach. He taught me history, and we started with Wars of the Roses and we ended with the English Civil War. And he really gave me a passion for reading and history. And I also had very good English teachers. I got into history of art, spoke some German, learned to speak German and write German fluently. So I was one of those pupils who messed around a lot until about the age of 16, really benefited from the focus of A-levels, being able to give up subjects that I was either not interested in or hopeless at. And so the A-levels really suited my learning style, but you know, good teaching, and also the ability of certain individuals to see that there was some talent there as well, which I don't think I displayed any talent at all at prep school or in the first couple of years of senior school.
And you mentioned a couple of teachers along the way. Do you think you appreciated at that time that you were being mentored through those key moments, or was it something a little more subconscious than that?
I think at school it's more subconscious, and I think the biggest influence on you is the peer group, the people that you're surrounded by, particularly at a boarding school, and a lot of the time you spend trying to fit in, and it's, you know, I was at school at a time when it really wasn't cool to be an intellectual or academic, and that was you had to leave the herd behind and actually swim against the stream. And very, you know, there were tiny pockets where you kind of resistance to the anti-intellectualism and the boorishness that prevailed at that time in many independent schools, particularly male. I mean, King's Canterbury had some girls in the sixth form, but it was a pretty male and sports-centered school, with quite strict hierarchies, top down. A lot of bullying, and you had to work your way through that, because the dominant culture is quite strong, and so you have to find individuals that kind of you map onto. So it's much more about finding people your own age that you can identify with, and that's not easy. And it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of children do struggle at schools, particularly big schools, particularly schools that have a strong identity, a strong ethos, and they tend to be the ones that have a top-down, made in whichever school it is, identity. And some parents find that attractive, but for the individual maverick who might not fit that mold, it can be pretty horrendous going through a school which can be turns into a grinding machine.
And thank you. That's really interesting. If we sort of take it as read, then that peer-to-peer culture has shifted massively since the time when you were at school to the kind of school that you run now. As a senior leader in a school, what do you think a head teacher or a leadership team needs to instill directly to make sure that peer-to-peer environment is really strong and can have the right outcomes as you've kind of described?
So first of all, to make sure that you really stamp out intolerance, so your intolerance of intolerance, and you make sure that there is a really elastic ethos in terms of fitting in, and plenty of opportunities to explore different interests, so that the ideology is really diverse and inclusive, and those days where you got the dominant ideology, you got everyone looked up to the first 15 or the Bloods in their sports blazers, that you recognize the talents of your musicians, your actors, people who go slightly under the radar, who may be very active in service, may have interests and hobbies which lie outside the school and don't get picked up in school activities. But you just recognize that we're not living in a homogenous society. There is and people's personalities change, and we have to embrace and recognize and allow those different personalities to come through. But it's creating a culture of openness and interest, where people do feel valued, and not necessarily because they're doing something which is going to bring greater glory to the school.
And I suppose in a similar vein, there's been a slight shift from that traditional focus on grades towards an appreciation or an understanding of well-being and soft skills and character and the development of the human being around the grades or the portfolio of work that they take forward from school. How do you think in the next 5 years from now, schools will continue to develop that focus on soft skills? Where do you see that sort of pathway heading?
There was a really interesting report that came out of the World Economic Forum at Davos in 2020, which identified the future of employment and the skills that were going to be needed, and the structure of this report was that schools and universities are educating and training young people for a portfolio of jobs, careers, which many of which are jobs which haven't yet been invented. The idea of a single job for life is going to be something of the past. That we always tend to assume that technology has advanced as far as it's going to advance, and of course that is always wrong. And there's an exponential advance in technology. So we're going to be using technologies which haven't been invented, and we're grappling with problems that we're only just beginning to understand. We think we've got a handle on things like climate change, but we all we're doing is seeing a bit of the problem. We haven't really come to grips with the whole problem. So those are some of the issues that we're facing, and in order to adapt and create a toolkit to survive in this world, those softer character virtues that you talked about are going to be needed, and things like complex problem solving, analytical thinking, harnessing programming skills with creativity, learning how to work in teams, understanding how communication works in an age where we can. I've just had a board meeting with the charity I chair, Street Child, and we've got 20 board members across the globe, with country directors in Afghanistan and Democratic Republic of the Congo and Nepal coming in to join the call at different times. So the fact is that our systems of comms, even in the last 3 years since COVID, has changed enormously. And to understand that, and also to understand the complexities of mental health challenges and well-being in an age where pupils are subjected to a constant barrage of information and trying to curate their own lives on social media, to try and understand that is also difficult for educators, particularly those of us who grew up, learned our craft before this technology was widely available or understood. So those are the challenges and the character virtues that we're putting in place here. So we've got something called the Stoic Award, which sits alongside the conventional GCSEs, A-levels. Those are the sort of normal metrics of success. But the Stoic Award tries to measure participation, engagement, social service, perseverance, tenacity, conscientiousness, humility, grit. Those are the softer virtues which come through taking part in sport, being part of a company in the theatre, or joining the orchestra, going up a mountain for a Duke of Edinburgh silver or gold expedition, or helping riding with the disabled, or at Stowe we've got a number of ecological projects working with the National Trust and Stowe House Preservation Trust, and doing that sort of engagement. So yeah, it's interesting, much more holistic approach to education, and a little bit more interesting than just cramming facts and working towards a test.
So many interesting things there. I suppose you stay relevant, you upskill on the context, yeah. You know everything that's sort of needed. You put in place this amazing forward-thinking, innovative education that a school like Stowe can offer. And then you can track things as you go, but long-term on a sort of macro scale, how will you sit back and assess the success of all the initiatives you're putting in place in a few years' time? Maybe long after you left Stowe, what to your eyes would be the measure of the success of that diverse curriculum, I suppose?
Well, there used to be, we had a governor who's had a strange hobby. He used to collect the obituaries of old Stoics, which he described as the league table of life. So looking at the number of obituaries, what people were remembered for. And interestingly, we were, last time I checked, we were about third in that league table. So Eton was first, Winchester was second, and we were third equal with Westminster. And I thought that was such a really interesting way of looking at it, because that is the, it's a tally of all your achievements over a lifetime. And of course, not everybody gets into the obituaries for good things. There are people who are quite notorious as well. But people who have made a difference, they're change makers. They've made an impact. And when I do open mornings, we've got one table of change makers from the past that, and they're usually people who've been quite disrupted, who challenged the conventional wisdom or orthodoxy, said, do we have to do things this way? And I start off with people like Leonard Cheshire, who look beyond disability and ask disabled people, how able are you? And set up 270 Cheshire homes, operates in 53 countries. People like Nicholas Winton, who went off and organised the Kindertransport and rescued 669 mostly Jewish children from Czechoslovakia. And there are 6,000 people alive today because of those Kindertransports. But he was told, why are you bothering? You're not going to make a difference. And he said, well, no, I can make a difference to these children. I'm not going to be able to save everyone, but I can save these children. And then bring that up to date, more up to date, someone like Richard Branson, who was president of the Old Stoic Society, and how he took on the behemoths, the giants like British Airways, and said actually business doesn't have to be done in a fixed way, and opened up Virgin Atlantic, created a platform for the Virgin brand, which now goes across hundreds of businesses in a really interesting way. So, and then the next slide is looking at the change makers, more recent old Stoics from the last 20 years, many of whom are now just getting into their kind of stride. And we've got people who are looking at the organizations of hospitals, looking at eradicating educational poverty through the United Nations. Somebody who's is just the youngest major in the British Army, who's training commandos at the moment, and then people in fashion, people in the media. But the thing that they have in common is that they tend to be disruptors. They tend to look at an existing model of business or thinking and challenge that existing model and say, how can we do things differently? Can we be more nimble, agile, proposition led, and also having a little bit more of an appetite for risk in challenging things, the status quo. But it does come. The downside is that there will be risk.
I think the risk appetite point is a really good one. That kind of adventurism in wider life, and I love the idea of the league table of life with the obituaries. I think that's great.
Yeah.
So if we zoom out even further, the Tories get kicked out tomorrow. We install Anthony Wallersteiner's new government, and he decides that it's time to make one great change to the British educational system. I know that's a big question, but where might you begin?
What I'd really like to do is give everybody the chance of accessing independent education. So, our current ambition is to raise £100 million. We've actually raised and spent £100 million over the last 20 years on Stowe. So National Trust, Stowe House Preservation Trust, and the school together have raised and spent £100 million. So we can do that. £100 million is a scary number, but over 20 years it can be done. So we're raising £100 million for an endowment, so that we've got fully funded places, 100 places at the school in perpetuity for disadvantaged children to come to Stowe. Now that again is just a pebble in the ocean. If we were to give everybody the equivalent sum of money in a voucher to what it would cost to educate a child in the state system, let's say £6,500, so you can offset that either at you can cash it in at either an independent school, you can get a independent school day education for about £14,000, we started about £22,000. But with a bursary and a scholarship, that £6,500 will erode the cost of education. So give everybody a chance to access an independent education by offsetting what they pay in taxes against school fees. And I know it's not going to educate everybody in independent schools, but it will give everybody a chance to access education, which is going to go in the opposite direction if we get a Labour government that puts 20% on school fees by adding VAT and by taking away the advantageous business rates that schools currently enjoy. So unfortunately, the direction of travel looks like it's going in the opposite direction. I would throw open the doors of independent schools and say, be our guest. Come and join us. We want to be part of the educational mainstream. We want to be in the conversation with state schools. We don't see an educational divide. I happen to be in the independent education system because, quite frankly, I didn't get a PGCE after university because I don't have a maths O-level. So I'm not allowed to teach in a state school. It's as simple as that. It wasn't a choice of going to independent schools because I thought they were better. It was simply when I went to the Careers Advice Service after university, they said I needed to redo my maths, which I only took once. I missed the third paper of my maths O-level because I went to Nebworth to see Led Zeppelin, which I thought when I was 16 was a good idea. And then nobody ever told me that I had to take maths O-level again. And I had a couple of science O-levels, so I think that was sufficient to get me into Cambridge. But when it got to going into teaching, that bars me from being in state schools. So it's as simple as that. So most teachers in the independent system are not ideologically driven. We're not trying to teach a privileged elite. We want to be here because we love our subjects, we love schools. We happen to believe that the state doesn't always get it right, but that isn't the main driver. That's not the main reason for people being in independent schools.
Thank you. Well, from the dangers of ideology, which I agree with, right through to Led Zeppelin at Nebworth, I think we've covered plenty there. Thank you so much for all those insights, from the big macro detail down to life at Stowe and the way you've found your way through your incredible career to date. So thank you. Really appreciate the time, and I know people will look forward to listening to this.
Good, Henry. Thanks so much, and good luck with Oppidum.